I have to get out of here. It's on my tail. Oh my god, he's on my tail. He sees the light. I see the light. If he sees the light, I'm going to see the light. Oh my god, I'm gonna die. Hello YouTube and welcome back to The Theory Crafters, the show where we put on a scuba suit and dive deep into the lore of Minecraft mods. Last video we explored the magnetic caves and determined that their downfall was the result of human selfishness. When some of the miners escaped the caves, they had trouble adjusting to society after their traumatic experience. For this reason, many felt helpless with no idea of what their future held. Because of this, when they were reached out to by people looking for employees, they finally felt like they had a purpose again. From what they knew from the people reaching out to them, they would be conducting research of Minecraft's deepest trenches. For many ex-magnetic cave workers, this seemed like an interesting and relatively easy job as opposed to constructing machines and mining in a cave from exterior human connection. However, this opportunity would become hell for all of the scientists employed at the bottom of the trench and would end in tragedy. Join me for a journey beneath the waves. Humans have always had a fascination with the ocean. From the beginning of history persisting to this day, people have always wondered, what could be down there? The earliest known documentation of humans' interest in the ocean would be dating as far back as 4500 BC, where the ancient cultures of the Greeks and the Romans settled on the seaside. These cultures would begin diving into the ocean for food, trading, and potentially even warfare. But what makes us naturally gravitate towards learning about the ocean? Well, have you ever been to the beach and just felt good afterwards? What is it about the sea breeze that makes us feel good? The sea air is a bit thicker due to elevated salt content, which aids in clearing your throat and lungs, making breathing feel rejuvenating. Fine sand found on beaches allows your skin to exfoliate any dead cells and smooth out your skin. In addition to this, there have been studies conducted that suggest that listening to the natural sounds of the ocean aids in reducing stress, lowering blood pressure, and generally providing a calmer state of mind. To support this fact, according to this 2024 study of the happiest states in America, Hawaii is ranked as number 1. That's right, the tiny island in the middle of the Pacific is ranked as the happiest state to reside in as a US citizen. There are a number of benefits that explain why we gravitate towards the ocean, but you get the idea. In a more materialistic sense, the ocean has been gracious to us. From a nearly infinite source of food to providing opportunities for commerce and trade, the ocean has been such an important aspect of our global society. There's also the matter that in our evolutionary history, the ocean is where we began our journey. Don't just take it from me, take it from John F. Kennedy.
We are tied to the ocean. And when we go back to the sea, whether it is to sail or to watch it, we are going back from whence we came.
Can you imagine what it was like for early humans to see the sea and know nothing of what to expect? For all they could have known, they could have just fallen off the face of the earth, or they could find new lands and discover new adventures. The truth is, the lure to the ocean is the same as the lure to adventure. Much like we fish the ocean for food, the ocean fishes us for adventure. We could talk all day about why we are so deeply infatuated with the ocean, but then we could lose track of this video's topic, so let's move on. Although we settled near oceans for sustainability reasons in our early days, the abyssal chasm in Alex's caves is far from a seaside culture. All of the structures are present at the deepest depths of the trench, and most resemble scientists' habitats rather than homes indicative of a culture. So where can we link this in our timeline? The abyssal chasm stretches 121 meters deep with its depth ranging from Y64 to about the bedrock layer, being Y-57. Although not deep by earthly standards, for Minecraft this would be considered the deepest point in the world, exposed to the surface. In Minecraft, an ocean with the seafloor generating at Y30 or below, the game considers it a deep ocean. So given that the seafloor of the abyssal chasm is generally around Y-50, the abyssal chasm would be just under 4 times deeper than the previously mentioned deep ocean. This makes it extra deep. With this information, we can make an educated guess that scientists down here were conducting deep-sea research and expeditions. On Earth, during the year 1875, a group of scientists led by Sir Charles Wyville Thomson were continuing their deep-sea mapping project when they recorded an estimated depth of the seafloor they were sailing over of 4,475 fathoms, translating to 8,184 meters. This was the deepest known point in the ocean. This incredible feat of discovery would then become known as Challenger Deep. Although it would be about 85 years before a second expedition was led to Challenger Deep, we can use our creative liberty and assume that in this story's Minecraft counterpart, scientists quickly led more expeditions and research endeavors regarding their deepest points in the ocean. So where does this leave us? If the miners from the magnetic caves left the operation 50 years after the advent of the magnetic machines when they rose up against their creators, which would be about 1810 if we choose to place it in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, we would land in Minecraft year 1860. This would place our miners 15 years before the discovery of Minecraft's own Challenger Deep. They could have been approached a couple of years after the discovery, placing our Abyssal Chasm scientist operation nearing 1880 in our hypothetical timeline. Life at the depths of the ocean was quite a bit different than life on the surface, for many reasons. Although most of the structures left by the old scientists that once lived down here are left rusted and oxidized, their main components are still there. Using what we can see from their components, we can make assumptions on how life was like before things went south. Given that the people that lived down here were scientists and engineers, most of the structures have blocks that would aid them in this endeavor. This structure, although it doesn't look like much from the exterior, likely was used to smith tools or other mechanical parts for submersibles. With a smithing table, blast furnace, and chains from the ceiling, people would smelt their iron, smith their tools, and hang them on the chains for later retrieval, although this may be unwise if the sharpened tools dangle from the ceiling. While some structures had a professional purpose, structures like these would be living quarters. A cramped glass dome under the waves could be perfect for staying in. After all, who doesn't want to stare at the endless ocean hundreds of meters away from safety? Jokes aside, this structure only has beds, and given this fact is exclusively a living quarters. The fragile nature of the glass would be a problem for later in the story, however. Finally, this structure would be the last building that remains intact after the war. It appears to be a moon pool, which is an equipment deployment bay that provides access to the underwater without flooding the interior. Within the moon pool, there are a number of shelves and rusty barrels full of junk, which we will get into in a moment. However, what is most intriguing to point out is the use of a magnetic activator, which is a block built from the materials found in the magnetic caves. This essentially places the timeline of the Abyssal Chasm after the time in the magnetic caves. This structure is interesting because it appears to have some human remains, a dark indicator of what's to come. Some of the items that litter the chests left behind in these structures take the form of various fish from the caves, pearls, marine snow, and books, along with the occasional scuba gear and materials to make more scuba gear, being copper. Scrap metal is also found here, which could have been used to make repairs on their structures. Sometimes you will find a pottery sherd depicting Guardian, a clear indicator of the defenders of the scientists that live down here. What's interesting is that the fact that this many books litter this many chests shows that either the people who lived here really enjoyed reading or could be representative of scientific findings they discovered while conducting their research. Once the former miners were situated in their new role as scientists, they would gradually be moved down under the waves into habitats built into the seafloor where they would be securely placed in the natural muck of the bottom of the trench. For the first few years of the deep-sea expedition, it was business as usual. Scientists took samples from the seafloor and conducted research on the flora and fauna of this intriguing new world. While taking samples, a scientist would notice a partially buried structure made of a dark counterpart of prismarine and report it back to the head scientist. Fascinated by this discovery, the head scientist would instruct scientists to put on their dive suits and begin investigating further. Inspecting the cracks in the fascinating new block, they would notice a subtle pulsing light that appeared when touched. When excavated, the structure appeared to be that of a large pillar that would lead up to what appears as an altar. Because no one could decipher what it meant or how to activate it, the scientists were left puzzled yet intrigued. Eventually, when storing excess pearls collected from mussels, a scientist placed a pearl on top of the altar. When the scientists turned around to continue their work, they could feel a swift current of water behind them. Confused, the scientist looked back at the altar and noticed that the pearl he had placed was now gone. Believing it to have fallen, the scientist turned around to look for it, but upon turning back toward the altar, noticed that the pearl was still sitting on the altar. Or was it? Upon closer inspection, this pearl glowed a baby blue color, a distinguishable difference from the bright pink of a standard pearl. Realizing this difference, the scientists reached out to the head scientist and stated what had happened. Intrigued by what this person had discovered, the head scientist ordered for further investigation of the discovery. The scientists placed a number of items on the altar, but nothing yielded any result. It was at this point where they had to try the pearls once again. The pearl lay idle on the altar, and the scientists left back to their habitat in defeat. One scientist had a shelter with a clear view of the altar, and that night they saw a glowing set of eyes and what appeared to be a lure hovering over the altar. The mysterious denizen swiped the pearl from the altar and swam away, but not without placing something in exchange. The item in question appeared to be some form of orthicone on a stick. The scientist went out to the altar and grabbed the item for further inspection. The following day, he shared his discovery with the head scientist and made the remark that whatever these things were, they were watching silently from the shadows and only came out when nobody was watching. Eventually, the scientist would continuously place excess pearls on the altar, and the person who received the specialized pearl earlier noticed it had changed its color from a baby blue to a more teal color, signifying a change. One day, while conducting some experiments out in open water, a person would turn their head and notice what appeared as an enormous jellyfish. Startled, the person swam away. Seeing that the giant jellyfish had not even flinched but was instead in the same spot simply following the scientist's gaze, the scientist would regain the confidence to approach it. Upon approaching it, the jellyfish creature would slowly maneuver itself around the person, almost studying it. Soon, the creature left, and the worker had gone back to their assigned tasks. At the end of their task, the scientist was placed yet another pearl on the altar. Only this time, things would change. Once placed, the pearl was then grabbed by an unknown creature and would place yet another item as per usual. However, what made this part different was the fact that the original pearl traded for had turned from a teal color to a bright green color. Something had changed, but for the better. Or did it? With the gazing pearl glistening with a joyous shine, workers would find themselves being approached by the denizens they've been trading with far more often. From what they could tell, there were 4 variants, one resembling a barrel-life fish, one resembling a traditional angler, one appearing as a jellyfish, and finally one enormous crab. They were given the name Deep Ones, so that the scientists could easily identify them on the field. The initial 3 variants were far more abundant than the crab variant, as in all their time within the abyssal chasm, they only saw one Deep One crab. Although all the Deep Ones were friendly with the scientists themselves would find them as a great annoyance while working. The Deep Ones would constantly be in the way of the job and would be a hindrance to the workers. This escalated to the point where the scientists had to do something to deter them from being in the workplace. They constructed Mine Guardian anchored to the seafloor to surveil the workplace to ensure that the Deep Ones would not intrude on research operations. For years, this was an effective way to deter the Deep Ones from interfering with science, but the Deep Ones wouldn't take too kindly to this segregation. The gazing pearl would slowly shift its color from the bright green back to teal, showing that something has changed in regards to the Deep Ones. This reputation would continue to deteriorate, as while previously scientists did not venture into the Deep One's territory, designated as open water between habitats, scientists would begin expanding their outreach in the pursuit of more materials to establish more bases at the bottom of the seafloor. This expansion only accelerated with the creation of far more submersibles to quickly traverse the open waters to look for more base locations. While this certainly agitated the Deep Ones, they wouldn't truly snap until they witnessed what the scientists would do next. However, to explain why this would be an issue, we must first understand the culture of the Deep Ones. The Deep Ones are a tribe of fish people that have evolved significantly in the environment of the abyssal chasm. Throughout their time in history, the Deep Ones always had immense respect for the ecosystem they live in. They understood the food chain and their place in the trench. They recognized that in order for the abyssal chasm to maintain its ability to support not only themselves, but the other creatures that would call this place their home, a delicate balance must be achieved. The Deep Ones would ensure that the area they live in will always be able to thrive. One of these ways would be the preservation of the food chain, as if the food chain falls apart, the ecosystem will fall out of regulation. The top of the abyssal chasm's food chain is the hullbreaker, a huge leviathan-like fish that serves as the keystone species of the abyssal chasm. Without the hullbreaker, its prey, the gossamer worms and the glow squids, would grow out of control. With an exponential population increase within these two species, their prey would be hunted so frequently that their population would become scarce. This prey could be forms of vegetation or smaller fish, that if they were hunted to extinction by the glow squids and gossamer worms, then the bottom of the food chain has now crumbled. With fish populations plummeting, now the gossamer worms and glow squids would have nothing to eat, and they would die out. Once all species have fallen from the food chain, the deep ones themselves wouldn't have anything to eat, and they too would eventually go extinct. For this reason, the hullbreakers are the keystone species of the abyssal chasm. Without them, the abyssal chasm would be thrown out of balance. This is why the deep ones have such immense respect for the hullbreakers and their ecosystem. They have grown to cherish this world because it is the only world they have ever known. Keep this in mind as we go into our next chapter. Back to the scientists, they would use their submersibles with bright lights to expand their reach of the seafloor. This bright light would draw the attention of hullbreakers, which would then crush, destroy, and eat the submarines along with any unfortunate scientist piloting it. Scientists saw this and out of fear went into hiding. What they didn't consider is that their own habitats had bright lights that would also be noticeable to the hullbreaker. Seeing one base get destroyed by a hullbreaker for their attraction to light, scientists would up the defense with more mine guardians around their habitats, programming them to self-detonate when approached by anything. Armed with a plan and a vengeance, scientists lured in a hullbreaker with bright lights only for the mine guardian to detect the hullbreaker and explode. This explosion was so violent that the water around the base had turned red in the hullbreaker's blood. The deep ones turned their attention to the hullbreaker's lifeless body slowly sinking to the bottom of the trench. Going to inspect the carcass, the scientists looked down upon the deep ones as they reviewed the corpse. The deep ones looked up at the scientist, anger in their eyes for disrupting the natural flow of the ecosystem before swimming away. Upon reviewing the gazing pearl, it no longer shined a blue, but rather it glistened in a bright red color with malevolence. The next day was business as usual, the scientists not expecting anything out of the ordinary. However, when night fell, what the scientists saw was incredibly frightening. The enormous crab had grabbed hold of a mine guardian's chain and flung it towards the standalone habitat, destroying it to pieces as the mine guardian exploded. Taking this as an act of aggression, the scientists geared up with their scuba suits and swords, along with occasional weapon the deep ones traded with them when they were on good terms. However, this was not their battlefield, and they were quickly picked off by the deep ones. Seeing their intense losses, the scientists equipped their submarines with torpedoes and other weapons to aid them in their battle. This proved to be an effective strategy, as the deep ones were not able to effectively get to the pilots. Although this was a short-term advantage, eventually the deep ones grew in numbers and overtook even the strongest submarines. With the help of the Deep One hero, submarines would be destroyed in the double digits. After days of slaughter, an eerie silence overtook the abyssal chasm. All but one of their bases was destroyed. The Deep Ones left the base alone, and for a while the scientists thought they were safe. However, they were brewing a plan. The scientists would finally get the break they needed when they found the structure that held the Deep One hero. This structure is where it lay dormant until the Deep Ones called upon them for help. Armed with a small army of submarines that were modified to shoot torpedoes, the submersible team would surround the structure from all sides with their machines. Firing one shot to awaken the creature, it burst from the ceiling, exactly how the crew had planned. On the count of 3, the submarines all simultaneously fired their torpedoes. With enough explosions, the tough exoskeleton of the Deep One hero was cracked open, exposing the Deep One hero to the enormous strength of the torpedoes. After heavy bombardment, the Deep One hero collapsed onto the seafloor, where it lay weak. In an act of pure hatred, the head scientists exited their submarine and plunged the ortholance into the skull of the hero. The strength of the Deep Ones had just plummeted. With the death of the Deep One hero, the Deep Ones had to assemble one last effort to save their dying ecosystem. Seeing their biggest strength in numbers and how the scientists were frightened by the hullbreaker, they rode towards the last standing human base on the back of the hullbreaker at full force. With attacks from hullbreakers happening from every angle, the base could no longer stand and the people had to flee. With the final slaughter underway, those fortunate enough to have left the abyssal chasm in the midst of the chaos never returned. yet created cave tablets to perhaps one day salvage what was left of the operation. The story of the Abyssal Chasm would be one of the greatest tragedies in this Minecraft world. With the amount of casualties, this would go down in the history of Minecraft as one of the highest death counts of any events. However, seeing the death of their colleagues, the scientists would not lose their interest in science. Instead, they would use it to develop new technologies to ensure that should another conflict arise, they would be prepared. Next video, you can expect us to cover the history of just a standard Minecraft cave turned to nuclear testing grounds to birth the toxic caves. Thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you next time. For now, I will go with the flow of the abyssal waves and be back for the next video. Wait, before you go, if you aren't caught up on the lore, check out the video we did on the magnetic caves.